Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, thank you. So, as mentioned, I am the director of an organisation called Honey Badger. One second. Yep. Um, I set up Honey Badger during the pandemic, and we're an organisation that sets out to help other organisations improve their culture through culture design, number design, and experience design. So we work with business leaders to understand what's working and not working in their organisations with a focus on diversity and inclusion. And I'm also the head of experience at Culture Shift, which is a technology startup, a tech for good startup that uses is building software to help people who've experienced bullying and harassment report what has happened to them and get the support that they need. And we work predominantly across the university sector and public sector. I do a whole bunch of other stuff as well, as mentioned, but really what's at the forefront of my mind is actually being a new mum, and I'm on mat leave at the moment, and this is the first talk I've done in a long time, so you'll have to bear with me if I ramble. Thanks. So I'm also an introvert. So I do a lot of public speaking, and it never gets any easier, but I wear gold shoes to try and help me feel more confident. Yeah, this is completely out of my comfort zone. I get really, really nervous. So I will speed up and slow down throughout this talk, and I will go quiet and loud depending on what I'm talking about. So if my voice does waver, can someone at the back just put their hand up and let me know if you can't hear me? And the reason I actually put this as one of the first slides in my talk is I'm a big believer in empathetic design, and I like to get my vulnerability out there at the beginning so that people understand kind of where I'm coming from. I'm also a brown woman, just in case you didn't notice. And it's really important for me to say this because Agile on the Beach has done a really good job of having a diverse lineup, but I've been at conferences where that hasn't been the case, and you don't often get to see people like me doing keynotes at conferences like this, particularly in the tech sector. And it's just important to get out there, but it also shows, again, that vulnerability of the barriers that we have to go through and the boundaries we have to break just to be on the same stage and in an equal setting. And as I mentioned, I'm a new mum. So whilst I'm giving this talk, my brain is simultaneously trying to think about how many nappies my daughter has in her nappy bag and when her next nap is, and also the next 5 slides I've got coming up. So one thing I have learned from my year off is how to multitask. And I think I am nailing that. So yeah, these are the kind of the things that make me me at the beginning of this presentation, and these are my vulnerabilities. So yeah, please bear with me as I get through this. And having a year off means I am very, 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 very nervous. So thank you for being a great crowd, and thank you for coming, particularly after the night last night to the morning this morning. So yeah, thank you, and I hope you did all have fun at the beach party. Okay, so on that note, I'm here to talk about culture. So one for all and all for one, what does culture really mean? And to kick that off, I'm going to talk about what's happened over the past 2 years, because a lot has happened. And this is going to be a tale of 3 parts. So first part, what's been going on? Where are we now? The second part, I'm going to go into some culture theory. And then the third part is what can we actually do to improve the cultures in our organisation and try and get us putting good technology out into the world that's not just good enough, but good for everyone. So, this guy, he's done some stuff, hasn't he, recently? But March 2020, we were plunged into the pandemic. We were told to stay home, and I'm one of the families that actually got hit pretty hard by COVID. We lost my auntie April 2020, so kind of one of the early hits of getting it. And whether we kind of have accepted it or not, or whatever's going on, we've been through a lot of trauma over the last 2 years, and the pandemic sparked a lot of that. We've had to change our lifestyles, we've had to change our ways of working, we've had to change what we wear on our faces, how often we touch our faces, how we wash our hands, if we have hand sanitizer. A lot of stuff has gone on, and with that has come a lot of trauma, a lot of heartache, but also a lot of solidarity and a lot of change. And I think it's really important that we give ourselves the time and space to acknowledge all of that change as well. We also saw a mass global protests. Black Lives Matter took to the streets after the murder of George Floyd, and it's really important to note that the 2020 protests were not the first Black Lives Matter protests. They had been happening from as early as kind of 2016 and onwards. And the global protests alongside COVID and being on social media a lot more due to being at home a lot more, I think pushed this into the forefront in ways that we hadn't seen before. And what it really showed me was this awakening to this problem with race that we hadn't addressed in ways before, but I'll touch more on that in a bit. And we're also going through a climate crisis. And I think, again, the last 2 years has really highlighted just how vital and how much of an emergency this is. And I think it was when the world stopped, we started to realize the pollution in the air. We started to notice when we stopped hearing airplanes in the sky. We started to hear the birds instead. We saw that the skies cleared all of a sudden because there was no pollution in the big cities. And it took that stop with the pandemic for us to all realize that. And I think we're on the brink of just pushing ourselves back into something that we've had the opportunity to stop. So it's been a lot. There have been, and that's not including anything else that's been going on, you know, personal lives, having babies, life going on, whatever. And it hasn't actually stopped. There's still a war going on. We're still living in this energy crisis. Cost of fuel's going up. Rising costs of living, we're going to plunge into poverty. There's also the recession. I'm not even going to talk about politics in the UK, but it's still a lot. So there's still all of this stuff going on. And if you're like me, you're in it. You're just kind of in it every day, trying to figure out where these like little bits of light and hope are to try and get you through to the next day and understand how you can put some good into the world. And that is hard. It's really hard. And that's why it's important to come to conferences like this, where you get to see nice people and have good conversations and actually figure out what you can do to make it a little bit better. So if that's everything that's happened over the last 2 years, what have we learned? I think the first thing that we've learned and what has been shown is that we're able to adapt when we need to. And adapt is the key word here, because we were thrown into this environment where the rug was pulled out from under us, and we were forced to kind of take things on as we needed to. And it meant that we started to see headlines like this, where organizations started to realize the benefits of working from home. And they started to see that actually you could be as productive working from home as in the office, and that was a good thing. And all of a sudden, all of the kind of restraints and constraints and that trust we have in our employees was kind of lifted up, and big organisations were starting to realise that the office that they spent millions of pounds on actually didn't need to be there, and people could work from home, and we could have these virtual meetings. And granted, after 2 years of doing that, it got a bit much, and we did realise we need to go back into the office. But there's something there about this hybrid working, and when push comes to shove, the organisations that said we can never have staff working from home had staff working from home. And it's caused the shift in what hybrid working means. And Culture Shift did some research with about 1,000 respondents at the beginning of the pandemic. It was in April 2020. And we saw that over 55 said that they had seen an improved work-life balance. And although this also means 40% said they hadn't, it shows us that there is something that was wrong, or something that wasn't quite right in our workplace offices that weren't supporting people that were over 55. So we have learnt that this adaptive culture means that we can support people in different ways, in ways that we hadn't necessarily anticipated. And likewise, for people with varying abilities, over half of the people that responded to this bit of research said that they had seen an improved workplace culture by working from home as well. And so when we're able to adapt our working patterns and our cultures, we can start to see how we can support people with different lifestyles and different backgrounds to be more comfortable in their working environments. So the second thing that I think we learn, and that came from the last 2 years, is that the UK has a problem with race. And I was kind of toying with whether to have this in here. When I did my run-through, someone kind of said to me, but doesn't everyone know this already? And I had to push back and be like, no, actually, if anything, the last 2 years has shown me that people didn't know this was a thing and that people didn't realise that the UK has got a big problem with race. And the reason I think people hadn't realised it is because as a person of colour, I've grown up being taught not to talk about my experiences of race. I've been taught to kind of just let it wash over me, put it to the side, put it in this box and carry on. You know, it's just one of the things you have to accept. And that meant that people didn't think there was a problem. People didn't think racism exists. People didn't think that you still get shouted at the street, just shouted at when you're walking down the street. And I can tell you that does still happen, and it happens regularly. I'd say at least once a month, whether I'm with my daughter or not. It's not okay, but it does happen. And I think it took the 2020 protests for people to realise that that's still happening. And this presents itself in workplace culture quite adversely. So Black and Asian people in the UK feel that they're held back in workplace promotions, in their abilities to get hired, in pay rises. And this is also true for people from LGBTQ plus backgrounds, and the gender pay gap is still a thing as well. I think it was 79% of Black and Asian people feel that they don't have the same equal access to opportunities. And it's well worth reading this article if you haven't a chance to, because everyone in this room has a role to play in trying to improve this equality for people. And some work that the research we did with Culture Shift, again, found almost half of the respondents from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, a term that I don't like using, but for this I will, said that their workplace culture had improved from working from home. And again, what this shows us is that the culture in the workplace doesn't necessarily support everyone in the ways that we think it does. And people can and will often feel more comfortable to be themselves in their home environment. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, why is that? What is it that we're doing in our offices or in our workplaces or team settings that is putting people on edge and not making themselves feel comfortable? And some research that Honeybadger did around the Black experience of work and the Black experience in the workplace found that 71% of Black and minority ethnic employees felt that promotions were unfair, compared to just 35% of their white counterparts. And again, we did a lot of research doing one-to-one interviews with people to understand more about this, and it was kind of the things that were talking to us were, we have to just work that much harder and we're overlooked, and if we don't have someone on our side in the organisation, we're never going to get the promotion. And it was really harrowing to hear these conversations and people explaining, I've got a master's, I've got a PhD, and I'm still not getting through those gates. And this is why I say the UK has a problem with race, because when you listen to the stories and you hear the experiences of people, you start to see how it's played out in workplace culture and the culture that we live and breathe in. And actually, just on a side note, I'm talking predominantly about diversity, race, and inclusion here, because that's what my experience has been, and it's not to disregard other types of difference and inclusion, but it's what I've done a lot of work in. But on a more positive note, it's meant that we have started to see that the status quo isn't an excuse anymore. We're starting to see people push back on what has been the norm for so long and saying, this isn't good enough, we will not do this anymore. And the kind of mantra of, this is how we've always done things, is getting hit with a hard, so what? Why does that matter? And it means that we're asking questions around the technology that we are putting out into the world. So if anyone does have an answer to this question, I'd love to hear it. Who is making sure AI isn't racist? I don't know. Because if it's not the people in the room, we need to be those people. Sorry, I should have said at the beginning, I will hopefully have time for a Q&A at the end of this. So if you do have any questions, please save them till the end, or if not, find me afterwards. But yeah, we need to be asking these questions. We need to be making sure that the teams that are in the room and developing the technology have the power and the voice to be able to ask challenging questions about what we're putting out into the world. And the same goes for new technology that we're going to be living and breathing in, so the metaverse. And I think this headline's made me laugh the second time I read it, because it's, yes, racism might ruin the metaverse. Ah, that's a problem. It is a problem. And the reason it's a problem is because we're not building in the protocols that we need to prevent or keep people safe in online environments. And I think that's really key. And again, we start to see how when we're not looking and not scrutinizing the data sets that we're putting into the technology we're putting out into the world, that we're being reliant on, it starts to produce, it starts to be racist and sexist, because that's what the data is telling it needs to be. And I've been talking a lot about data recently, and how we need to be scrutinizing it and holding data sets to more accountability, and understanding how we bring more diversity to those data sets to prevent things like this from happening. And fundamentally, what we start to see is that technology fails the global majority every day, because the people in the room that are building the technology that goes out into the world are not diverse enough. We don't have enough people who think differently, who are able to support people with different needs, who have the experience and empathy of these lived experiences in the room, or they're in the room but don't have the power to use their voice and challenge to question the technology that we're putting out in the room, putting out into the world. And for far too long, the mantra has been move fast and break things, but that break things has been at the detriment of people like me, at the detriment of people who that technology fails. So it's so crucial that the people who are building and making this technology have the power to say, who have we forgotten? Because that's the question we forget to ask ourselves too much. And this is from things as small as hand dryers that don't recognize darker skin tones, through to stop and search technology that's been implemented across London that racially profiles Black and Asian men above anyone else. And the knock-on effects of that can be hugely detrimental to someone's life. So we need to make sure that we are asking these questions, because it is our responsibility to do so. And because of that, we have this huge opportunity to change things. And the reason why it's a huge opportunity now is because we're on the brink of returning back to normal. I mean, we're all sitting in this room at a conference when 2 years ago we had to stay at home. We don't have to wear masks anymore. But if you want to, obviously that's okay. But, you know, we have this huge opportunity here, but if we blink, we will miss it, because we are in this rush to return back to normal and to go back into business as usual. I don't know if anyone else is the same, but my calendar has been full all of a sudden, and I'm like, when's this happened? I remember when all I wanted to do was just go out for a walk, and that was it. All I could do was go out for a walk, and it was amazing, and it was really lovely. And now all of a sudden, I don't have any time anymore. We're about to fall back into this kind of cantering speed ahead, and we need to stop again and understand what power we do have to create a future that we want to live in. So what does any of this really have to do with culture? The extent of our courage or cowardice cannot be measured in ordinary times. It's all revealed when something happens. So the culture that we live in, breathe in, it actually happens when bad things happen. And I'm going to be referencing Ben Horowitz quite a lot throughout this talk, because his work on culture has been really, really good. And just let people take a photo. It's when push comes to shove that we realize what the culture really is. It's where we realize what the values of the organization we work for are. When things get tough, we want to know what's going to happen. So what I'm trying to say is everything that has happened in the last 2 years, it is culture. It's been a part of our foundation in creating the culture that we live and breathe in, and that has translated into what the culture in the workplace is. Those two things work simultaneously, hand in hand. So culture is everything that makes you you. It's everything that has happened to you. It's all of your experiences. It's your background. It's how you were raised. It's all of these external influences that turn us into the people that we are. And it's those values that then determine your behavior. So understanding who you are and where you've come from then explains how you act and behave in the real world. And this is us on an individual level, in the teams that we are, but also the businesses that we work with or for. How does culture traditionally work in the workplace then? It's how employees behave when no one is looking. It's how we make decisions based on the assumptions that are set out before us when no one's telling us what to do. And that's why working from home was really interesting, because you didn't have people in the office checking you or seeing what you were doing. It helped us understand what the culture really is to get the job done. And so traditionally in an organization, the business culture sits at the heart of it, and this is often determined by the CEO or the founder, their working patterns and styles, or the founding team, and they set the culture, they set the rhythms, they set the rituals, they kind of set the kind of what happens in the workplace setting. So if you see your business leaders working 18-hour days, it sends a ripple effect on throughout the company, so that your team start to think, okay, that's the norm, that's the precedent, that's what I have to do. So the business culture then influences the team culture, and it says to teams, okay, this is what our leaders are doing, this is what we then have to do. And that then puts your culture out on the peripheral. So you as an individual see what's happening in the teams, and we then think, right, I then have to fit into this. I have to mold myself and shape myself to fit into this team culture that is set from the top. And this is traditionally how it's worked. You kind of have the business culture at the heart, that feeds into the team, and then the people who actually run and make the business happen, who are the frontline staff, who are out there doing the day-to-day, putting this technology out in the world, are left on the peripheral to kind of pick the pieces apart and say, right, how do I fit into this? And this then leads us onto different types of business culture that we might see. And I hope everyone appreciates my 90s references in this bit. Oh no, it's another matrix. We're going to have a little matrix here to explain some thinking that I've done on this. So we have a grid of flexible leadership and flexible employees. And the reason I've used flexibility in part of this is because I think flexible versus inflexible is a really good way of understanding how you can push and pull different levers to help people feel themselves and to help teams accomplish what they need to do. So on the bottom, we've got kind of inflexible leadership through to flexible leadership, and inflexible employees up to flexible employees. So when you've got inflexible leadership and flexible employees, you have something that I call cultural collapse. So this is where your leaders are kind of saying, we need to be changing, we want to do all this cool stuff. This is where your leaders are saying, we don't want to do any of that. We don't want to change. We like the way things are going. We are hitting our targets, and your employees are going, but we can make it better. We want to change this. We can do things differently. I've seen how we can do it differently. You've hired me to bring all of these ideas in. Why aren't you letting me doing these ideas? And the leaders are like, well, we hired you to actually just do your job. We don't want you to do any of that. We've got targets to meet. We have too much work to do. We're thinking billable hours. Just get the job done. And often it comes down to they can just leave if they want. We can hire someone else like that because we're a big organisation, or we've got the cultural reputation that means people want to work here. And I've seen this culture more, in my experience, in agencies or consultancies where it's been work, work, work. You just have to get stuff done. I remember kind of one of the agencies I worked in had a play hard, work hard mantra. And it was an advertising agency, and it was like just work, 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 and then just go out and party. And there was no room or scope for any innovation or change, even though all of the employees wanted to do all this really cool creative stuff. The leadership were like, no, we just have to meet the brief, just get it done. And this kind of leads to cultural collapse. It's where there isn't really a culture. It's just keep working, but the story we tell out into the world is one of innovation and leadership, because it's what the employees are saying they can do, but the leadership's stopping them. And it's kind of like this Tasmanian devil approach. Things are changing all the time. It's a whirlwind. It's leading to lots of collapse. The business is strong because they're getting the revenue in, they're doing well, but at the expense of employees who are leaving when they realise they can't create any change. We then moved into this fixed culture mindset where it's inflexible employees and inflexible leadership, where no one actually wants to change anything. It's easy, it's comfortable, this is the kind of we've always done it this way mentality. And it's here that this works for us, so why would we change anything? And this, in my experience, is where I kind of think back to my time in central government, where I did kind of get told, you're going to have to wait for me to retire before you see that change. It's just more of the same. We hire people in. It's easy to do the job. We don't want to do anything differently. It's just that kind of plodding along. It's just very fixed, very easy. And this is kind of where you get this dinosaur mentality of you just keep going. We're going to keep things the same. We're not going to embrace any new technology. Just leave us alone, and we'll be fine. And I kind of think this is where your blockbusters might have sat in, just getting left behind, not picking up on where the future might live because you're doing well. And then in this kind of flexible leadership, but inflexible employees, I think this is where we see a lot of transformation happening. This is where we get stuck in this rhythm of trying something new constantly, trying to stay at the forefront of new trends, implementing change quite often. It's where I have worked with a lot of tech startups, and I see their culture sitting of, oh, well, what we've seen over in Silicon Valley is open plan offices, dogs in offices, yoga on Fridays, et cetera, which is all the surface stuff, but that just gets implemented quite often. And when I say it's inflexible employees, it's all of this change is coming from the top, but people on the ground are like, I just want to do my job. Stop trying to make me reflect and do all this team building stuff. I just want to get stuff built and do it and put it out into the world. So this is where it's almost too much change, and it's this constant transformation. And most of us sit in this space because it's kind of, it's again that top down, this is what's best for you, rather than what do we actually need. And it's all done with good intentions. It's kind of, we think this is what's going to make people happy. We think it's what's going to be good for us as a team, but without really listening to what the team want. And so it just creates this resistance. And then we move to adapt. And adapt, again, I'm using this word because we've shown that we can adapt in this. And this is where you have flexible leadership and flexible employees, where people are willing to work together both in the business and on the ground to try and make the best culture for everyone that's there. And this is where you have leaders and teams and people in those teams saying, this is what we need, so let's try it. Let's make this happen. Let's see what happens. Let's experiment. But it's not a top-down approach. It's listening to what's happening and doing it. So it's little and often rather than kind of these big transformations often. This is the sweet spot. This is where we wanted to be trying to get to. And this is where we become the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And we work together, gel together as a team. And with any one of those parts missing, we can't take it on and really get to where we need to do. So we're constantly trying to adapt and work together to figure out how we take it on. These aren't the end of my 90s references, by the way. So just to recap, so cultural collapse is where culture doesn't exist. It's where people are just leaving, and the top don't mind, and good people are leaving that organisation. Fixed is where things never changed. We're just stuck in the dinosaur frame of mind. We don't want things to change. Transform is where change is unnecessarily hard because it happens too often with good intentions, but it doesn't always land with employees. And adapt is where change is relatively easy because it happens little and often. Change is never easy, but relatively easy is where we want to get to. It happens little and often, and people understand the benefit of why that change is taking place. So that all sounds great in theory, and it's like, oh, yay, in Matrix, we can figure out where we sit and plot ourselves on here, but what do you do when you do that? What happens when you realize that you're a dinosaur, or you're the Tasmanian devil, or whatever it is that we kind of find ourselves in? How do we actually get ourselves to this adapt quadrant? So we need to start and flip the script. We need to put ourselves first. So we need to put ourselves at the heart of this culture, put ourselves in it. So taking the time to understand who we are and what we do. And in order to do that, we put ourselves in the heart of it, and we use ourselves to then inform the team culture, how we want to work in teams. And we use that team culture to then inform the business culture. And I've done this in organizations, with organizations, and it works really well in here we are as an individual. Here is me presenting myself to you as an individual. Here are the things that I hold dear. Here are the things I can be flexible with. And then that team leader takes it to the business and say, here are our team values. How do they align to the business values? And do they align? What do we need to change? How do we make this work? And this is a constant cycle of empathy-driven design that enables us to inform the business culture and keep changing it dependent on who is on the ground and doing the work. And I think that's the bit that people forget is culture needs to change. It needs to adapt so that we can keep people happy and keep them doing their jobs to the best of their ability. So if we're going to start with ourselves, how do we actually do this reflection and be able to have the confidence to take ourselves into the workplace, our full selves into the workplace? Julia Middleton wrote a book called Cultural Intelligence, which talks a lot about what's in your core and what's in your flex. And I think it's something that really speaks true to me of understanding the values that you hold dear and that you won't budge on versus the things that you can and don't mind. So you have to know your core if you want to be able to put yourself into work. And that means taking a look at the things that make you you. So I put my vulnerabilities out there at the very beginning of this presentation because I think it's important and they're the things that make me me. But the other things that make me me are rooted quite deep in my parents' immigration story and knowing that they came from relative poverty and came to the UK and worked really, really hard to make sure that me and my siblings could go to university, and I've reaped the benefits of that ever since. And knowing that kind of my dad's ambition when he was little was just to live in a house, that was all he wanted, rather than a bungalow, rather than a shack, was one of the most humbling things I've ever heard him say. And that sticks with me in knowing that that's who I am, that's where I come from, and that's why I do what I do. And it's these stories that we often don't take the time to let ourselves relive or to let ourselves bring into the workplace because we don't see it as part of who we are, or we see it as part of ourselves outside of work. It's kind of, this is professional me versus this is actual me. This is who I am behind closed doors. And I think we need to be able to have that choice to take our whole selves into work. But in order to get there, we need to do the work to figure out who we are. So the things that kind of sit in my core are giving back and being able to ensure that people who look like me and have the same story as me have the same opportunities as me. So I want to do that as much as I can. And that means also knowing the things that I can be flexible about. And the things that are in your flex are the things that make other people comfortable, the things that you can do that you don't mind changing because it can help someone else realize what's in their core. So this could be, so for me, I don't particularly care about what I wear or how I look. So if it's really important to someone that I cover up and look modest, I can do that without it really affecting my core. But that might be something that's really cool to them that will make them feel more comfortable at work. And so I'm able to kind of do that give and take in order to make someone else be themselves at work. So that's how we want to be operating, is kind of, these are the things I care about, these are the things I'm flexible about, and the things I'm flexible about can help someone really well. Really well. And it's important that we're challenging the things that are in our core and in our flex all the time because we take it for granted. It wasn't until I stopped drinking that I realized how many business decisions are made in the pub after work. And it's those kind of things that where we need to be the person in the room that says, hold on, let's stop doing that because X, Y, and Z's not here, or we've made an assumption that everyone can do this. And that's how we can make other people feel comfortable. And if we don't put our culture first, we won't be able to put anyone else first. We won't be able to put our users first, our employees first, our clients first, because we're not taking care of the people at that core. And I made it 70 slides without getting a picture of my daughter in here. But this is why it's important, because I want to know that when I'm at work, it's for a good reason, and it's the time that I'm spending away from my daughter. And I want to know that I'm putting everyone first, because when I get home, I want to put her first. And if I'm not looking after myself and spending 8 hours a day feeling comfortable and doing good work and being supported, I'm not going to be able to be who I need to be when I get home. So that's why it's important. So then how do we take all of that, take who we are, and put it into this team culture? The first thing we need to do is realize what it takes to be an ally. because everyone has a different story, a different battle, and it's important that we use the power of teams to be an ally and not take on other people's battles, but make sure that they've got the support they need when things aren't great. And so I often talk about Colin Kaepernick here, who took a knee back in 2016 in the NFL against the police brutality in the US, and he got fired. He couldn't get a job as an NFL player ever since, and still hasn't. But his teammates were able to carry on, but they took a knee with him as well. And it's because of a politicized movement in the sport that meant he was blacklisted. But what we want to see is actually that allyship around a common cause and a common problem. That doesn't mean it's just people who look and think like you who have got your back. It's everyone there supporting you around a problem. And it actually wasn't until I realised that I felt more comfortable talking about experiences of racism that I'd had on Twitter. I felt more comfortable talking about it on Twitter than I did with my colleagues, that I realised I actually wasn't supported in the workplace to be able to have those conversations. And to really think about how we operate in teams, when you know yourself, you can understand what your values are and how they then determine behaviours. So we've got this dynamic between values and behaviours going on. One way of doing that is creating your user manuals, which Cassie Robinson kind of did a good article on why these are important, and it's a good way of starting to share the things that make you you. I just want to point out my last sentence here. I'm a weird hybrid of a 90s rude boy and middle-aged housewife, because it is very, very true. But it's how we can start to bring ourselves to work. So asking ourselves the questions of what makes us us, what makes you you, being able to share those with your team, and then understand the common set of values that you have, what you have in common, but most importantly, what you don't have in common, because that's then where we bring the core and flex that we have in ourselves into that team dynamic. So what is it that we have in common? What don't we have in common? Where do we meet in the middle? I'll go back. I see someone taking a photo. And this then determines our behaviours. So as a team, we value our diverse team with different backgrounds, experiences, perspectives. And that therefore means that we celebrate and respect all festivals that are special to our team. This is a really simple way of how it can work. So I understand that my team hold all of these things in their core. Therefore, as a team, we lift it up and say, this is how we operate. This is how those values translate into behaviours. Another really good way of kind of bringing the individual up is the team canvas. So this is an example of how you work together and understand different roles, responsibilities, values, and turn them into rules and actions and goals so that your team is aligned around a common purpose and set of values. And this is, I haven't created this, so I can't take credit for it. So this, you can actually just find this canvas on the internet and use it in your teams. And so how do you kind of get there? We need to start making sure we start in safe places. So in order to be able to have these open and upfront conversations, we need to ensure that people have the psychological safety in the workplace to have them. And that doesn't mean people can get away with saying whatever they want, but it's making sure that people feel safe when they have questions, or they can come to you when things aren't quite right. We need to celebrate microcultures. So when you start to use yourself to define your team culture, that then defines the business culture, you start to see microcultures happening across the board, because different teams have different people in, and therefore will have a different interpretation of values and behaviours, and that is okay. It's okay for a technology team to have a very different culture to the HR team. The problems occur when we try and create this homogenous culture that we think can sit for everyone. But as long as you have the same values overall, interpreted in different ways, you can celebrate microcultures, because people are getting done what they need to do. And it's really important when you have those cultures that you over-communicate to other teams, so explaining what works for you, what doesn't work, how those rhythms and rituals work. And this is where team leadership becomes really important as a champion for, this is the culture in our team, this is how we want to operate, this is how we work. And this is how we get stuff done, like evidencing how it works and how it enables you to do your job, and constantly having those conversations so people get it. So when you've looked at yourself and you've then defined your team culture, you get onto business culture, sitting around that top. And this is where you start to look at culture fit versus culture add. So I think we've seen over history that we want to get culture fit. We're hiring for culture fit. Culture fits, we want people that fit into this team. I'm actually saying we want to go for culture add. We want people who can add to our culture, who might challenge that culture, who give a different perspective. And this slide got outdated very quickly. A little bit awkward. So half of these people aren't there anymore. But it's a really good example of where culture fit is in place, because they might look diverse. On the surface, you've got men, women, different races, etc. It's ticking all the boxes for what diversity is. But actually, it's just culture fit. People from the same background, with the same perspective, same outlook on life, making decisions. You've not really got anything different there. And this is the image of culture fit that I always have in my head, is where you just hire and you're like. You're just trying to get people that think and look like you, that you would easily work with, but get the job done to the same standard. It's just more of the same. It's just that kind of ticking over. It's the same thing. You're not going to have people challenging you. You're not going to have that positive conflict. That's really important, to have those challenging conversations. So what we want to go for is culture add, where we specifically look for diversity. And when I say diversity here, I actually mean difference. We just want people who think differently, who have come from a different place, who might speak a different language, not been to the same universities, like all of those things that make us who we are, all of those differences. So all of those different perspectives, different lived experiences, trying to have a voice, trying to challenge the way we've done things, different backgrounds. And how do we get there? How do we actually encourage all of this diversity and help it flourish in the workplace? We need to start by reviewing our hiring practices, and I could do a whole talk just on this because it's that big. I've got it on one slide. But it means thinking about who's on the hiring panel and are they different enough? Will people be intimidated? Have we thought about the questions that they're going to ask? Are we asking every candidate the same questions? Are we looking into anonymous recruiting styles? How are we actually keeping track of who we're hiring, who we're not letting go of? Are we seeing any trends in who we're hiring and how we're hiring? Are we starting to see that, yes, we do only hire middle-aged white men, and why is that happening? Why is that getting through? What's the problem there? We need to look at all of these hiring processes and work together to understand how we make it much more fair and equal, because our unconscious bias will be playing a part in what that looks like. And this means really doing the groundwork on scoring and the questions that we ask, and giving people fair and equal opportunities to do it. And even the language that we use in our job descriptions, women are less likely to apply for jobs that don't have the salary on them. So just really simple things that we can do to improve how we get jobs out there into the market and encourage more people to do it. One of the things that I've started to implement in teams that I'm working with, which is really, really difficult to do, is we won't take people to interview until we've got an X percentage of diverse applicants. And it's really hard to do because you lose people in that process, because it can sometimes take a long time to hit that percentage mark. But the message we're putting out there is we won't take people to interview until we know we've got the percentages there. And it might seem a bit quotary and a bit surface, but what it does is makes us rethink how we do that whole hiring process. And as part of that, you need to start collecting the data. You need to collect the data that makes you uncomfortable. So how many applicants have we had of this background versus this background versus this background, and where has it come from? As well as the data that we have in our organisations. We need to understand who's leaving, when they're leaving, why they're leaving, and putting those into spreadsheets and seeing if we've got a trend of young mums leaving after they've just had a baby. What does that tell us about the culture that we've got here? Or is it that we're seeing trends in people leaving 3 years in? Does that mean we're not actually promoting people enough? We need to start collecting this data so that we can make informed decisions about the culture that we have in place. Because we can't solve problems we don't know exist. If we're not collecting the data and it's not being evidenced and it's only on hearsay, it's really difficult to make an informed decision on it. So we need to collect that data so that we can say, here are the facts, here's what's going on, here's the lay of the land, and let's solve these problems, because it's really difficult to argue with those numbers. This is my other 90s reference. I don't know how many of you are au fait with the Space Jam 96 soundtrack, but this is from the Monstars anthem. And you need to hit them high and hit them low. And by this, I'm talking about impact. So we want to have high impact change that is going to make things different. So this is the kind of reviewing your hiring processes. It's the big things that are going to make a change, but we also want to do the low impact change that happens incrementally every day. And this is where you as an individual can make those changes by just asking the question, who have we forgotten? Is this good enough? Have we done the work? Who wasn't in the room when we made this decision? It's the little things that need to happen, and we need to do both of these things simultaneously to create that the business culture that helps people flourish. And we really need to start doing this now because time is running out. We're at the brink of things just going back to normal and being thrown back into life pre-2020. And I don't know if anyone else has felt this, but I've really felt like just pushed into kind of things just moving really quickly. And I keep kind of trying to restrain myself and be like, no, we were so close to change. We were so close to things like happening and having these conversations. And I just have this sense of urgency that it needs to happen now. Now more than ever, actually, because things are changing. Because we can't look back at 2020 and the last 2 years and think, why didn't we do more? Why didn't we ask those questions? Why didn't we stand together and say, no, this isn't good enough? Why did we let ourselves fall back into normal because we just really wanted to go out for dinner or we just wanted to, sit around in the pub? Because things are changing for the worse still. We're seeing bad things happen for women's rights across in the US, and it's not any better here with changes to human rights in the UK. So we want to make sure that we're asking these challenging questions, because if we don't do it now, things can change for the worst, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they change for the better. So if I go back to what does culture really mean, it's creating an environment that helps us change the world. It's using the power that we have as practitioners in technology to put things out in the world that are good, and that aren't just good enough, that are good for the global majority. For all of those people that we've forgotten need to have access to that same technology. It's up to us to make sure that we're creating environments that help everyone flourish, just not just the people that have always been there. Because we have the skills that people will use to change the world. We've got it in our hands. We're the people with the power here. Because we can't let the future generation down. We can't let people grow up still facing the same problems that I face every day. Like, I don't want my daughter to grow up in a world where the name box isn't long enough for her to put her full name in, or she can't find her race on the drop-down form on a government form because it's not there. We need to be doing better so that people that are different have the skill, have access to the same opportunities and the same technologies as everyone else, and it doesn't fail them at the first hurdle. Them's the breaks. Thank you, everyone. So I think I've got time for some questions. I think there's someone at the back there.
Hello. Hello. Yes? Okay. Thank you for a great talk. This is something personally that I'm very passionate about, and I'm definitely going to take away a few ideas, like the user manuals for my organisation. My question is, there will be some people who are maybe resistant to change or feel threatened by change, and we hear a lot in the news about culture wars and anti-woke and things like that. What can we do to bring people with us on this journey who may otherwise feel like that?
Yeah, I think that kind of anti-woke mantra is really dangerous because it belittles the experiences of people who have been othered. And it's when I face those kind of, a snowflake trying to create change in the world. I kind of say, no, but it's good for business, actually. And that's where I go back to the global majority. So we're not building things that are good enough for everyone, which means we're losing out on money, we're not having as many users use our technology as possible. And the business case for diversity in the workplace, there's so much work that's been done on the benefits of that. So I then come back with we're actually not doing this because we're doing this because it's the right thing to do, but it also makes business sense. You know, the profitability is there, people are happier, therefore stay for longer, which means it's a cost saving to the business because you're not having to hire all the time. Like, just go in with the kind of, yes, it's a good thing to do, but it's actually also a good thing to do for us as a business. So that's how I tend to take people on that journey. And it takes a lot of hard work to unlock that unconscious bias and help people understand that everyone has unconscious bias, and we need to start challenging that in the workplace. And that's where the safe spaces becomes really important. And I think as business leaders, we need to understand the people who aren't quite there yet, what work needs to be done with them to get them there, to have those open conversations, and not be scared to say, actually, that's not okay. That's not how we talk about these things. Like, that's as important as just letting the conversation happen. I hope that answers the question. Thanks.
Thank you. You talked about decisions being made in pubs, and I think pre-lockdown there was decisions made in smoking areas, things like that. With the hybrid working, which I think is going to be key, how do we stop another divide coming where some people will be in the office, others choose not to be, that sort of thing happens, but now in the workplace rather than in other areas?
I think we're just starting to understand what that looks like, and as people who can make those decisions, it's making sure we have the technology that enables people to be in the room when they're not in the room. So good video conferencing technology, making sure that they're heard, and also whoever's hosting those meetings or decisions, being a facilitator and recognizing that the people that are on the screen have things to say. So it changes the way that we have meetings, in that you're not just in the meeting anymore. Someone has to be keeping an eye on everyone having a voice, and almost changing how we talk. So those little conversations that don't get picked up by the microphone, we have to stop and say, so-and-so can't hear you, can you say it louder? Or if you've got something to say it to the room, not just the person sitting next to you. And again, it's being confident enough to be able to say, this is a facilitated meeting now, we need to change the way that we've done them. And also, recognizing that not everyone does need to be in those meetings to make the decision. So if a decision's made by the majority and it's got through, we almost need to say, okay, that's the decision, let's run with it, see it as an experiment, and then reassess in X amount of weeks because it's been made, and just almost draw a line under it. And I think that's the biggest change I've seen happen. That's hardest for people who aren't in the room. It's kind of like, I wasn't there, it got made. I want to have that conversation again. It's like, actually, no, I just have to accept it happened, I wasn't there. Move forward. So to those two things together, making sure you've got the right technology, someone's facilitating that meeting, but also accepting those decisions and reassessing later. I think there was a question down the middle. Yeah.
Hello, thank you. So you said earlier that the hybrid working thing, no one thought it could happen, but it did.
Yeah.
Are there other things that you think at the moment we just think are impossible that you think could change if we change that mindset?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think fair and equal pay is probably one of them. I think a lot of organisations say it's too difficult to look at the pay spectrum and level people up, so they just don't do it, especially if you're not forced to kind of report on your pay gap. So it's quite easy for people that are in that middle size organisation space to kind of say, we don't have to do it, so we won't do it. And I think that's got people closed to the problem. I think true flexible working is something that people take for granted. So, and it won't work for every organisation, I understand that, but choosing your hours around your lifestyle. So hybrid working, being able to work from home, great, but actually working around school hours or caring needs or just sleeping patterns. Like, I'm a night owl, I work better at night. Making me go to something at 7 a.m. just doesn't work for me. Just like those kind of things can make a really big difference. I think true flexible working is the other thing. And the third thing that I think is there is upskilling. So I think we are not often giving people the opportunities to change the work that they do in the workplace. We expect people to leave and go do it somewhere else. So giving people that opportunity to change roles or change the job that they do where they are, because they might be interested in something else. I don't think we see those opportunities just yet either. Thanks. That's such a good question. There's 2 over here and then 1 there. I'm so glad people are asking questions. I always worry no one's going to.
So how do people who are at lower grades, how do they kind of champion diversity and inclusion? And, you know, if you might be afraid to challenge, you know, people higher up in their leadership, how are you able to do that?
So this is where the allyship and support becomes really important. So knowing that as an individual, you might be in a team where it's really diverse, but the next level up's not. But if you know that in your team, people have got your back and you're open to saying it, you might have the more of the confidence to go up higher. But also using your networks within an organisation, so it doesn't always have to necessarily be your voice that's doing the championing, but if you can say it to someone who might have the confidence or the power or whatever it is to go and say it, that's really important. So that means making sure that the people who might be lower down have the support they need and can have those conversations with someone who has that power onwards, so that safe space, that allyship, but also creating the safe spaces to be able to empower them to do it as well, and knowing that there won't be any repercussions. I think that's the fear, is what will happen if I put myself out on this pedestal, what will happen if I rock the boat too much. And I think it's our responsibility to encourage rocking the boat as much as possible, because that's how we have the difficult conversations and can create change. So I think for people starting out in their careers or who might not have the decision-making power, it's knowing they've got the support to have those conversations and be a champion for it.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think there was a lady at... No? Okay. There was someone on the left-hand side.
Hi. I really like what you were saying about team, so individual culture informing team culture and then informing the business culture. I can see in modest-sized organisations that working quite nicely, but when you're in a large-scale organisation, maybe with tens of thousands of employees, I can't see a practical way of how that would work without just ending up with some sort of constant cycling loop and a big soup of all manner of different ideas going on inside the organisation, and a risk the organisation loses its own identity. Yeah. Do you see any way of dealing with that? Yeah,
so this is where you need to have a really good set of business values from the top. So the values of the business, you know, your standard kind of, we do good work, we're not mean, those kind of things that are strong enough to hold the business to account, but flexible enough for teams to interpret themselves and enable them to see, this is what not being mean means to us, this is what good work means to us, and still allowing people to bring themselves to say, well, actually, good work to me means being able to start work at 10 o'clock or, you know, whatever it is. And that's how you can then still keep the business identities with those core values there, but enable the individuals and the teams to create their own interpretation and understanding of it. So the core stays the same, but you're letting people say, this is what it means to me, this is how we operate within that. And to kind of challenge that loss of identity or lots of different cultures, I'd say those microcultures are a good thing, because it's how you let people be themselves and work in different ways. And more importantly so for big organisations that are global, because you want to be able to say, we recognise that the culture in Ghana is different to London, and therefore you will have different working patterns, you will have a different approach to it, and that's okay, because that's what works for you there, but it's not how it works here. And that over communication is then important, because we don't start meetings on time versus we do start meetings on time, or whatever it might be, is key to that communication of expectations and how we want to operate and work together. I hope that answers the question. Any final? Yep, one over here.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. It's kind of like a follow-on question from the previous one. Your concept of the, the avocado and the flex thing about the core and the flex, it's an interesting concept. But again, when you have kind of medium to large organizations, how do you manage the conflict where one person's flex might be conflicting with someone's core,
Yeah.
obviously in such a large organization?
Yeah, that's where that challenge of, is it really in my core or is it my flex, becomes important. So when we see the core and flex dynamics really, what's the word I'm looking for? It's always in a balance. So if you have too many things that are in your core, you kind of fall into that, I'm never going to change, nothing works for me. You're kind of stuck in your ways. And if you have too much in your flex, the opposite is true of like, anything goes, I'm really lucid, but I don't have anything that kind of sticks. It's kind of, you just go, you're too adaptable, it doesn't work. And so when you have someone's flex that is against someone's core or vice versa, I see that as a positive conflict because it then helps you reevaluate what is in your core and your flex, as long as you're open to that evaluation. And part of that kind of philosophy is that we should be evaluating what's in our core and flex quite often as we change as people, as circumstances change, as environments change. So even though it might seem like a big hurdle to overcome, if we can facilitate a conversation that enables people to see it from other perspectives, it might be actually what I thought was in my core is in my flex, or what's in my flex is actually in my core, and it's really important to me. Therefore, what does that mean for us as a team? And it means we have to have that positive conflict to understand what the team values and behaviours are. Otherwise, it goes as an assumption of, I thought they would act this way, but they didn't, or I assumed everyone thought the same about this, but they don't. And it's better to have those conversations out in the open than making those decisions on the assumptions. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you.